Shalom, I hope that you are safe and well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. This week's Bar Torah is being sponsored by Giselle and John Wine, commemorating the yahrzeit of Giselle's father, Elias Ovadia, Eliyahu ben Salem Zal, and it's also sponsored by Chavi Lehrer and Vic Mellon, commemorating the yahrzeit of Chavi's father, Harav Yitzchak Natan ben Harav Yosef Leib Lehrer, on the 7th of Adar. And also for the schus for Refuah Shlema, for Chavi's mother, Golda Bat Chaya Rachel. And on a different note, happy birthday shout out to Chavi's sister, Michelle Lehrer. Happy birthday, Michelle. Chavi emailed me yesterday that on Erev Shabbat Parsha Mishpatim of 2009, her father left her a voicemail telling her that he had such nachat learning with his grandson Gedalia, Chavi's son Gedalia. And they discussed why the first mitzvah, after the incredible experience of Har Sinai, was the mitzvah of Eved Ivri, of the Jewish slave, and how these events are connected. Rabbi Lehrer suggested an explanation, which I'm going to share with you towards the end of the Dvar Torah. And shortly after leaving this voicemail message, he sadly passed away. It turns out that the explanation he gave dovetails with the Dvar Torah that I'd like to share with you. Because the first topic of Parsha Mishpatim, this is after the 10 Commandments, and now Hashem says to Moshe, Eila HaMishpatim, these are the laws that I want you to place and teach to Bnei Yisrael. Ki tikneh eved ivri, if you purchase a Jewish slave, Sheish shanim ta'avod, he should work for 6 years. Uvashvi'it yetzei lachavshi chinam, and in the 7th year, he shall go free. And at first glance, this is one of those places that typically challenges the modern Orthodox Jew. A person could read this and say, how can I really take this seriously? Slavery, a couple of parshiot, after being freed from the slavery in Egypt, and now we start talking about enslaving another Jew. It seems anathema. It seems to be inconsistent with our ideals, and it doesn't seem to resonate with us. And this is the very first section that's taught to the Jewish people. But if you go through these portions, you see that what looks like a crass, ancient, primitive concept is really a progressive, forward-thinking, and incredible idea. Because Rashi explains that the main way that a person would become an Eved Ivri was through an act of theft. He stole money from another person, and then he either gambles away the money or spends it on drugs or loses it in some kind of way, and he doesn't have the ability to pay back the victim of the crime. A second way that a person could be sold as an Eved, as a servant, is if he defaults on a loan. And so, of course, he doesn't have the ability to pay back the creditor. Now, in antiquity, how are these individuals dealt with? And these are very different types of people. A thief committed a crime, a person who defaulted on a loan and is suffering extreme poverty is a different kind of case. But understanding the distinction, how are these people dealt with? In Islamic society, if you stole money, they would cut off your hand. In Western society, over the course of the centuries, you might spend your whole life in prison. In England, they would put people who defaulted in jail. A couple hundred years ago, Great Britain annexed Australia with the purpose of making it a debtor's colony. A person defaulted on a loan, the idea was that they would be sent there and they would spend their life in that one big jail. But if you throw the person in jail, so then the person, the victim or the creditor, doesn't get his money back, and it's very hard for the person to get his life back on track. This is society into the 20th century. Comes along modern economics, and you have the idea of bankruptcy. It gives you a fresh start. The lender can collect some of his debt, and the person can press the reset button. With regards to a theft, you have prison, but also there's rehabilitation and there's education in prison. And what's fascinating is that the Torah preempted this all by a few thousand years. Because if you have a case of theft or default and you owe the person and you can't repay the person, so of course the person is held accountable for his actions, but what's the solution? The Torah's idea is that the person can work off his debt for the course of 6 years. Or if he's sold into servitude, the funds that are raised are used to pay off the debt. And when the person is an Eved, he's not really a slave, he's an indentured servant. The Gemara says that the law is that if an individual has one morsel of food, and the question is whether to give it to his servant or to give it to his family, it goes to the Jewish servant. If he has one pillow or one blanket, it goes to the Eved Ivri. So this is entirely different than the servitude in Egypt. In Eved, the Eved Ivri is not slavery at all. Rather, this concept of an Eved is a rehabilitative work program. The creditor gets back his money in the form of work that he didn't have to pay for, and the thief is able to get his life back on track. And the environment here is all created to show him chesed, to show him kindness. It's a situation of care and compassion and kindness, always taking care of the Eved over the course of the 6 years. And after the 6 years, we're hoping that he'll go back into freedom. And if he continues to want to persist and live with the master, this is discouraged, but he has to go through that ritual to show that he didn't hear the message from Har Sinai that we're only supposed to serve one being, and that is God, and we're not supposed to serve anyone else. At the end of the 6 years, he's supposed to go free. And the Torah says in another place that he doesn't leave empty-handed. He gets a severance payment. And we're supposed to give him gifts so that this way he can actually get his life, get started again. So it turns out that he's worked off the debt, he's internalized the lessons, and we give him what he needs to help him get started again. Because after prison, or after a period of time, if you don't give him anything, so then he's going to lapse probably back into a life of crime again. And so all of a sudden, that thing which looks immoral and ancient and antiquated is really progressive and forward-thinking. And our society still struggles with this in terms of repeat criminals or people struggling with poverty. And nowadays we don't have the concept of an eved, of a indentured servant, and we have to deal with, find different ways of dealing with these situations. But at least compared to the way they dealt with these situations in ancient times, this was the Torah's structure to enable the borrower to pay back the creditor and to enable the thief to pay back the victim of the crime. And it teaches us really an incredible lesson, which is that halacha is a living, breathing, dynamic document that addresses life's challenges. And every generation has to deal with the challenges in a different way. But what you see from here is the obligation to treat every single person with dignity. People need to be held accountable for sure for their actions, but provide a response that firstly helps the victims and also gives them a chance to find that path of rehabilitation, meaning you want to help the victims, but give a path to the thief of rehabilitation, which will help them re-enter society and be able to have a fresh start. And this is what essentially Chavi's father suggested to her in that voicemail right before he passed away, that he was learning with his grandson Gedalia, and he suggested that the juxtaposition was to highlight this Torah teaching of the importance of affording human decency even to criminals who had to become servants to pay back for their misdeeds. And we were treated very, very poorly in Egypt. We must empathize with the plight of the vulnerable and treat them always with compassion. We have to show dignity and respect to every single person. And here you have the Torah creating this structure to help the person have a fresh start. We give dignity even to the thief. There's a beautiful story about Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer when he was returning to his home in the Nachlaot section of Yerushalayim, and he heard his housekeeper singing inside his home, and he decided to not walk into the door, into the house, but rather he walked around the block, and he didn't go home. So the students asked him later, they said, why did you walk around the neighborhood for 20 minutes, a half hour before going home? Was because of the issue of Kol Isha, that you didn't want to hear the singing of a woman's voice? And he responded, no, that's not the reason. The reason is because I know that as soon as I would enter the house, even as I got close, she would stop singing. She knows that I don't listen to a woman's singing voice. And so the reason I didn't enter is because I know she enjoys singing, and I didn't want to prevent her from having that pleasure. This is the sensitivity that we need to have to the feelings of every single person. We care about every single human being, even the dignity of the thief, and we see that from our Parsha. And all the more so, if we care about the dignity of a criminal, all the more so for us to care about the dignity and to go out of our way to provide care and support for all of the members of our family and all of our friends and the entire community. Shabbat Shalom.